What's going on, friends? Ted from Immersion here, and we have some good news, it seems like, or at least some clarifications that hopefully will put your mind at ease. There has been a lot of stuff going around lately about the lack of the 5th edition OGL and how Dungeons & Dragons is going to do away with it, and it's going to totally devastate third-party creators and ruin the tabletop RPG scene as we know it, blah, 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 blah. Okay? I've been talking about for a very long time that I thought, probably 2-3 years at this point on this channel, that was going to be the case. There were little signs here and there that kind of pointed towards it. And honestly, the biggest one is the lack of revenue that Wizards of the Coast can get, or the increase in revenue, rather, that Wizards of the Coast could gain were they to shut down third-party Kickstarters. I mean, you and I both know there have been multiple per year $1 million+ Kickstarters by a variety of third-party creators creating stuff for 5th edition. If you're looking at this as a corporate business and say, hey, you know, we've lost X millions of dollars since the launch of 5th edition to third-party creators, well, what if we could force them to only use the DM's Guild or whatever equivalency we'll end up having to force them into that, so that way we can get 50% off the top? Well, we're not going to lose out. We're still letting people do this, but we're getting 50% extra revenue, or, more than we would have, multiple millions of dollars. And I thought that was pretty much going to be a standard thing, and the way it was going to go is you could continue to make stuff for 5th edition, and then if you wanted to do whatever the equivalency of One D&D is officially called, if you wanted to do that, your options were pay us the money, give us the money by putting it out in the DM's Guild or whatever the equivalency is, or, keep making for the old stuff. Well, this has apparently gotten the attention of Wizards of the Coast to the point where an article was put out on comicbook.com just a few minutes ago, or maybe a couple hours ago, so let's go ahead and read it. Dungeons & Dragons clarifies support for third-party material as new edition draws near. Wizards of the Coast has responded to rumors of changes to the open game license and system reference document as it works on a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. For weeks, rumors have swirled about the future of two documents critical to the publication of third-party material for D&D. The open game license and the accompanying system reference document allows third-party publishers, ranging from companies like Paizo or Kobold Press to self-publishing creators like you or I, to publish and sell material that uses 5th edition rules. The open game license acts as a public copyright license, while the system reference document specifies which rules and game mechanics can be used when making third-party material. Earlier, here it is, specifically, this is Terran's thing. Earlier this month, the YouTuber Indestructible claimed that Wizards of the Coast would not create a new system reference document for One D&D, the code name of the upcoming new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. This would prevent publishers from making material specifically for One D&D, although they could still use the existing 5th edition system reference document to publish material 5e, to publish 5e material that could be, quote, backwards compatible with One D&D. Again, I've done it. I've had multiple videos on this channel about the future of D&D. You can go back and look at them, where I basically say I'm imagining that's not going to be something. I said the two things that Wizards of the Coast loses the most money on are virtual tabletops and third-party Kickstarter RPGs, or third-party Kickstarters, rather. So I figured they bought D&D Beyond. That fixes that, and then I assumed that they would eventually put the kibosh on the open game license, but maybe we'll see. Okay. While not creating a new system reference document for One D&D wouldn't snuff out third-party material, it would certainly discourage publishing or force publishers to turn to the DM's Guild, a digital marketplace that uses a separate license in exchange for Wizards of the Coast and Drive-Thru RPG, the manager of the DM's Guild, taking a 50% cut. We'll note that Wizards of the Coast previously turned away from the open game license for the release of 4th edition, with a more restrictive game system license used instead. So yeah, a little bit of history, and they may go on to it, but we'll keep going. In 3.5, they had, in the 3rd edition era, they had an open game license as well. There was an SRD for it, and that's actually what led to the birth of Pathfinder, because that existed. They had this game system license for 4th edition. Nobody liked the restrictive way it was handled. Nobody really, I'm not going to say nobody, people didn't as a whole seem to embrace 4th edition. So that led the folks from Paizo to go back to the 3rd edition system reference document and then make Pathfinder as a genesis of that. That's why if you look, there are a lot of similarities. But as I said, my interpretation would have been that you could continue to make things under the fifth edition open game license system reference document, and then if you wanted to use the new hotness of One D&D, you'd have to use the DM's Guild or what have you to do that. And I was okay with that because I was just assuming that would be what would happen. Comicbook.com reached out to Wizards of the Coast about whether they planned to update the open game license and system reference document. Wizards of the Coast responded with the following statement, quote, "We will continue to support the thousands of creators making third-party D&D content with the release of One D&D in 2024. While it is certain our open game license will continue to evolve, just as it has since its inception, we're too early in development of One D&D to give more specifics on the OGL or the system reference document at this time." You can find comicbook.com's full tabletop coverage here, blah, 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 blah. So it's one statement, but this is what we've got to go off of here. We will, I mean, it flat out says right out the gate, we will continue to support the thousands of creators making third-party D&D content with the release of One D&D in 2024. It states it right there in black and white. Now, point of reference, this is a quote received by comicbook.com from Wizards of the Coast. This doesn't appear to be publicly stated anywhere as far as I can tell outside of this article. Maybe some of the developers from Dungeons & Dragons have posted this somewhere that we can see as it stands right now, but none of those things are referenced. We don't have a link to a tweet or something like that. It seems like comicbook.com reached out for a statement. They got a statement. That's a thing that news articles do and news companies, so that makes sense, okay? While it is certain our open game license will continue to evolve, just as it has since its inception, which I will point out that it did change. It hasn't changed in about 5 years, but it did change. We're too early in development of One D&D to give more specifics at this time. Okay, that's a pretty boilerplate answer. I get it, all right? But I think what we have to clue in on is that first sentence saying that they will, in fact, support creators making third-party D&D content. Now, here's the tricky part, and this is kind of what I would take away from Taryn's video on all of this. Taryn being Indestructible Boy. One D&D has been stated multiple times that it is supposed to be backwards compatible with 5th edition. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people are cluing in on the specifics of what they've said or how it's been said. Maybe there's credence to that, maybe there's not. But the concept is people are saying it will be backwards compatible with the adventures, thinking that, okay, kind of how 3rd edition and 3.5 were similarly backwards compatible, and I did a video on talking about that too. But like you can use the adventures in One D&D, but the backwards compatibility only extends to the adventures and things like that, not the actual rules of the game and the mechanics of subclasses and whatnot. All right, as somebody who's playing in a game using some playtest rules and some base 5th edition rules, again, I'm not going to tout it as this grandiose thing I've played twice, so I can't really give you a whole, big example of that. I'm working to try to get to play this game more, and it is supposed to be weekly, but, life is what it is. I can see how there can be some confusions, but at least in a game where you're playing yourself, it seems like you can kind of pick and choose at the moment, right? Okay, we'll use this version of this rules, this version of that rules, and I know some of you may not appeal to you, but it gives you options, right? Options are open. So the concept was, if I can create stuff that if One D&D is supposed to be backwards compatible, could I design a 5th edition? It's wonky, right? If it's backwards compatible, but I can continue to develop things for 5e, but I can't for One D&D, but it's supposed to be backwards compatible, am I not developing things for One D&D in that respect? Again, if it is purely limited to just adventures, the adventure writes itself. I mean, honestly, you can write adventures not tied to any system, and they'll still be playable. You can write an adventure that you could run in a Monster of the Week game, and in theory, in Dungeons and Dragons, as long as you don't tie it to any specific mechanics, the storyline is presented there, and then the DM or the storyteller or whatever they are take it and adapt it as need be. But it says they're going to continue to support these creators. And I'll be honest with you, there has been rumblings in the community and a lot of folks that are worried about what the future of their career might look like. If you are someone like a Cobalt Press, a Ghostfire Gaming, folks like that who have a lot of, you might be able to get by without that much of an issue, but your bread and butter is producing high-profile products for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. In theory, you would like to genesis that into producing One D&D products, so that way you can continue to live with your business model that you've developed and perfected over the past couple of years, and continue to have your employees and pay them. I can't imagine if everybody transitioned to One D&D as like a general community, and you're out here playing 5th edition and making content for 5th edition, you're probably going to have to scale back your operations, lay people off, etc. Think about it, right? Where a lot of the world is playing 5th edition right now, okay? How many people out there still are playing 3rd edition? How many people out there are still playing 2nd edition or basic or what have you? There are people, sure, but when the general community as a whole shifts to a new edition, the coverage and the amount of content being produced for that older version significantly decreases to the point where you may not be able to support your living or your company producing content for old stuff. Yes, we have things like the OSR and all that kind of stuff, so there is a market for some of it for sure. But if you were a company who only produced products for 3.5 edition D&D, the amount of money you would make right now versus the amount of money you'd make producing things purely 5th edition is a very different number. And I think we can all agree with that. So whatever the ultimate genesis of One D&D is, if it was to stay with this model, you can make 5e, but you can't do One D&D, and the whole world shifts to One D&D. Not saying that they will, but it's possible, right? If it is that much cleaner, if big high-profile people like Critical Role and Dimension 20 and others start using One D&D system as their primary system, that's going to shift everybody's focus, or a lot of people's focus, towards that, and the folks just playing 5e base or what have you, there won't be as much there. So I can't say what support is, but they did say, Wizards of the Coast, that they will continue to support it. So I'm going to take this as an overall positive win for us and for all of our friends that run third-party products. As someone who's written for a handful of third-party products, who works very closely and has many friends who are employed by third-party companies, I'm going to take this as a general win. Now, as I said, the 5th edition SRD/Open Gaming License, I've covered this in the past, so I don't want to take too much time here as we're already getting longer than I'd like to be on this particular video. But it is a document that allows you to publish. And if you haven't seen it, I'll link this in the description because this is very useful for the amount. I also want to point out, and let me just take a moment here, I'm not the expert end-all be-all on what works and what doesn't, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to that. But there is a website on Wizards of the Coast's D&D website that kind of probably answers 90% of the questions that you have, okay? It's right here. It's dnd.wizards.com/resources/systems reference document. And you can see right here, download the V5.1, last updated on 5/4/2016. So the last time the open game license was updated was 6 years ago. Now, I will tell you that it was basically the version 5.0. It's not like this went through, I don't believe, if I recall, 5 different generations of this. Maybe it did, but I thought it was 5.0 and then 5.1, just because it's the 5th edition version of it. But either way, I do remember that they made some significant changes. For example, Eldritch Blast wasn't a spell that existed in the OG or the system reference document when they first launched it. So if you were making a subclass for a warlock, you couldn't even use or reference Eldritch Blast because it just wasn't an option for you because it wasn't in there. Now, if we were to scroll down and take a look, it'll talk about what you can do and what you can't do in regards to the OGL and the DM's Guild. And I'll come out and say this too. If you are planning to produce content for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition or possibly One D&D, whatever it ends up looking like, and you're just going to put it out for free, you have nothing to worry about here. If you were going to use this as a homebrew thing behind closed doors in your own campaign and nobody knows, don't fear the OGL. You have nothing to worry about. If you're going to release this publicly on your Tumblr account, your Mastodon, your Hive, whatever social media you decide to use, you don't have to worry about it. If you're going to put it out for free as publicly available on D&D Beyond, you don't have to worry about it. The only time you need to worry about the open game license is when you are going to sell this and make money. And that's the reason that this open gaming license, as we already discussed, is a public copyright license. The only reason that you need to worry about that is if you are going to try to make money off of Wizards of the Coast's intellectual property. This is kind of standard stuff, right? Nintendo has a variety of different logos and things like that. Now, if I were to say all of a sudden start producing my own game, calling it, Nerd Immersion, calling it Super Mario World or whatever you want to call it, and I put it out there and I start selling it and making money, I'm using a name, possibly even the assets and the imagery of Nintendo's products. Nintendo can shut me down, as I'm sure many of you have seen, where like 90% of fan versions of Pokemon games usually get shut down almost immediately because it's not licensed, and you're kind of, especially, I mean, even they're shutting down stuff that they're not profiting off of, that they're just doing for fun. If you were selling it, forget it. You'd be in a whole legal nightmare. But here you can see this table right above me here, right? I want to design content to use the 5th edition rules. It's usable by both. I want to publish my own original campaign, publish being the key word, as in publish this for purchase, right? OGL. I want to publish content using the Forgotten Realms, a IP owned by Wizards of the Coast. You want to publish that and you want to have it be sold, it has to be on the DM's Guild. I want to print and sell my 5th edition D&D product on my own, the OGL. I want to sell my product in a D&D online marketplace, DM's Guild. I want my content rated by and then this is just primary stuff, right? I want to be considered by Wizards. I want it for inclusion in digital games. I want my content considered for inclusion in Wizards marketing, okay? So, again, it's guidelines for publishing content under the Open Gaming License. The DM's Guild also provides self-publishing opportunities for individuals. You can click this document right here, the OGL itself, and view any of the specifics that you might have. The legal information is all listed here, and all of the legalese that explains how all of this works, right? What this license is used for, how it can work, and what things you can have. So everything that's in this document, this 403-page document, is fair game. You can include a dwarf in your version of 5th edition or whatever you're putting out there, right? You can use the dwarf, the base dwarf, all of the stuff that you see here. You're even given the hill dwarf. But that's why you can't publish things using the new One D&D version of a dwarf in your book, because that's not covered here. So many people say, well, hey, why don't these third-party creators make subclasses for the Artificer? If you were to scroll through this, you'll notice that the Artificer class is not contained in here because the Artificer wasn't an official class in 2016 when this thing was last updated. So you or I, if we want to make a Artificer subclass and publish it on the internet for purchase, we can only do that via the DM's Guild. That's why people publish those things there. Or you might see so many third-party creators making their own level 1 to 20 class version of the Artificer, possibly calling it the Artificer even outright, but maybe calling it something a little bit different, because, and it might look remarkably close in feel and design to the Artificer, but they can't use it because it's not here. The second this thing gets updated and the Artificer gets added to it, if that ever happens, people can go in and start making subclasses and publish them in their own third-party books, okay? And then you can scroll down here and it talks a little bit about the updates, right? For example, Eldritch Blast was added, as I mentioned earlier. You'll see there's other references here. And again, here's how all of, why does the SRD only have one background and one feat? Why do PC races not include all the sub-races? The goal of the SRD is to allow users to create new content, not to replicate the text of the whole game. We encourage players, DMs, and publishers to come up with their own backgrounds and feats. Why is it missing some spells? In general, the criteria that went into it And the SRD was 1, if it was in the 3rd edition SRD, 2, has an equivalent in 5th edition D&D, and 3 is vital to how a class, magic item, or monster works. For example, the 3E SRD has the delay poison spell, but in 5th edition that's handled by the protection from poison spell, so protection from poison is in the SRD. Again, the 3rd edition OGL is out there, it's established, that SRD exists. And then again, will more content. The full 5th edition game and expansions are available for use via the DM's Guild. New material will be added to the SRD if it is necessary to keep this document and its contents updated to the latest D&D rules. Now, perhaps that can be tapped into this statement from Wizards of the Coast, right? New material will be added to the SRD if it is necessary to keep this document and its contents updated to the latest D&D rules. It's stated here in black and white as well. Perhaps that is what they mean by we will continue to support the thousands of creators making third-party D&D content with the release of the One D&D in 2024. Again, it's too early to release specifics on the OGL or the SRD at this time. So perhaps we'll get a OGL or an SRD 5.5. Maybe they'll skip everything in between. Maybe it'll be called 6.0. Maybe it'll be called SRD 1 ONE spelt out. I don't know. Okay? But if you are looking to publish something from Wizards, something Dungeons and Dragons related, and again, publish being the key word here, and you'd have to look through the OGL on specifics, but when they say publish, I do believe they mean like publish in like a book, right? Not publish it for free on the interwebs, right? Because then, in theory, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast could be going after thousands of people who release content for free on the internet. Most of those people, when they realize that they can make money off of these things, they will either take it to the DM's Guild, because again, it does have the benefit of being a large online marketplace where people know to put stuff, and it has the largest amount of people out there reviewing it and looking at it. Or they'll just go the third-party route and do something like crowdfunding via Kickstarter. But as such, you have to think about that, right? So if you were to look through the open game license, if you're wondering, hey, you made that subclass or you made this thing, why didn't you give them this spell? So-and-so. Why is this not on the spell list for your new level 1 to 20 class? Well, the reason why is probably because it's not contained in the system reference document that says we're allowed to do it. It is pretty tightly confined in what you can and can't release. So you'd have to go in here and look and see, is the spell you want to add to your class in here? No? I'm sorry, you can't do that. Do you want to release it for free on the internet? Or just use it in a homebrew game behind closed doors? Give it whatever spell you want. But again, and I also want to follow up and say one final time, I am not a lawyer, and I am by no means an expert on what happens under the open game license and what goes on the DM's Guild. That's just my interpretation from what I've got from having reading this over the years. So anyway, folks, long story, much longer than I wanted it to be short. It looks like Wizards of the Coast is willing to continue to support and is planning to support third-party creators as we roll into the release of One D&D in 2024. What that ultimately looks like, we don't know. But as it stands right now, this seems like a pretty nice move, gesture, olive branch from the folks at WotC. I'd like to think positively, but I'm also not naive enough to 100% believe that it's going to be all cake and rainbows. But let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.